I never imagined that a simple surprise visit would shatter everything I believed about my 27-year marriage. My name is Marianne. I'm 54 years old, and until that Tuesday afternoon in September, I thought I knew Richard better than anyone in the world. But I was completely wrong. Before I continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what country you're watching from. Your participation keeps this community alive, where we share real stories about strength, dignity, and second chances. Until 3 days ago, I believed my marriage was solid. I trusted the man who shared my bed, my dreams, my fears, the man who had promised to love me in sickness and in health. But sometimes, the person sleeping next to us is a complete stranger. And the worst part is realizing how long we've been living a lie without even knowing it. And now I'm going to tell you how everything changed on that gray Tuesday. It started as such an innocent idea. Richard had been working late again, pulling those 12 and 14-hour days that came with being senior partner at Hutchins & Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms downtown. I'd been making dinner for one too many nights, eating alone while he texted me updates about client emergencies and depositions that couldn't wait. That morning, he'd rushed out without his usual coffee, and I thought bringing him his favorite sandwich and homemade lemonade might brighten his day. After 27 years of marriage, I still loved doing these small gestures that reminded him I cared. The downtown office building gleamed in the autumn sunlight as I pulled into the visitor parking space. I'd only been to Richard's office a handful of times over the years. He always said it was easier to keep work and home separate, and I respected that boundary. Maybe I respected too many boundaries. I walked through the glass doors carrying the lunch bag and thermos, feeling oddly nervous. The lobby was all marble and chrome, the kind of intimidating corporate space that made me grateful for my quiet consulting practice working from home. A young receptionist sat behind an imposing desk, her nameplate reading Jessica. She looked up with a practiced professional smile. "Good afternoon," I said, approaching with what I hoped was a confident smile. "I'm here to see Richard Hutchins. I'm his wife, Marianne." Jessica's fingers paused over her keyboard. She tilted her head slightly, studying my face with an expression I couldn't quite read. Confusion mixed with something that looked almost like concern. "You said you're Mr. Hutchins's wife?" Her voice carried a note of uncertainty that made my stomach tighten. "Yes, that's right. Marianne Hutchins. I brought him lunch." I held up the bag, suddenly feeling foolish, like a schoolgirl trying to impress someone who didn't want to be impressed. Jessica's expression changed completely. Her eyebrows shot up, and then she did something that froze my blood. She glanced nervously toward the elevators, then back at me, her professional composure cracking. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but Mrs. Hutchins was just here about 10 minutes ago. She went out to meet a client." The words hit me like physical blows. Mrs. Hutchins, present tense. Not another Mrs. Hutchins, or someone claiming to be his wife, but a simple matter-of-fact statement that shattered my reality. My hands felt numb around the lunch bag. Everything in me wanted to speak up, to correct this massive misunderstanding, but my voice had completely abandoned me. I don't understand," I finally managed to say. Jessica looked genuinely uncomfortable now. She lowered her voice, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. "Vanessa Collins. She's our marketing director. She and Mr. Hutchins have been married for, well, everyone here knows them as a couple. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to tell you." Vanessa Collins. The name echoed in my mind like a death sentence. I knew that name. Richard had mentioned her occasionally over the past 3 years, his brilliant marketing director, the woman who'd helped the firm expand its client base, always in professional context, always casual, always innocent, or so I thought. But what happened next was even worse. I stood there in that marble lobby, the lunch bag growing heavy in my hands, while my entire world restructured itself around this new, terrible truth. 27 years of marriage, 27 years of believing I knew this man completely. And all of it had been built on lies. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need to sit down?" Jessica's voice seemed to come from very far away. I watched her stand up, concern etched across her young face. She couldn't have been more than 25, too young to understand the weight of what she'd just revealed, too innocent to know she'd just destroyed someone's life with a few casual words. "I'm fine," I heard myself say, though I was anything but fine. "Could you tell me, how long has Vanessa worked here?" "About 3 years, I think. She started right after I did." 3 years. The same time frame Richard had been pulling those long hours. The same period when he'd started traveling more for client development. The same years when he'd grown distant, distracted, always checking his phone even during our rare dinners together. Something cold and calculating passed through my mind in that moment. Every instinct screamed at me to storm upstairs, to demand answers, to create the scene this situation deserved. But a deeper wisdom, born from 27 years of reading people in my financial consulting practice, told me to play along. "I must have gotten confused about the timing," I said, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass on my face. "I'll just leave this with you. Could you make sure Richard gets it?" Jessica looked relieved that I wasn't going to cause a scene. "Of course. I'll take it up to him right away." I walked back to my car in a daze, my legs moving without conscious direction. The September air felt sharp against my skin, but I barely noticed. Everything looked the same as when I'd arrived 30 minutes ago, but my world had fundamentally shifted. Sitting in the driver's seat, I stared at the office building through my windshield. 27 years of marriage. 27 years of sharing a bed, a home, dreams, fears, inside jokes that nobody else understood. 27 years of believing I knew this man completely. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Running late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. Love you." The words that had once brought me comfort now felt like another lie in what was apparently a web of deception I'd been blind to. I started the car and drove, but not home. Not yet. I needed to know more. I needed to understand the full scope of what had been done to me, because what I discovered in the next few hours would change everything forever. I drove through familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign, my mind racing through years of memories, searching for clues I'd missed. How many times had Richard mentioned Vanessa's name? How many late nights had he claimed were about work when he was actually building a life with someone else? My phone rang. Sarah, my best friend since college. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Marianne, I'm so glad I caught you. Are you free for coffee?" Her voice was so normal, so unchanged, that it felt surreal. How could the world just keep spinning when mine had stopped? "Actually, Sarah, I need to ask you something." My voice sounded strange, even to my own ears. "Have you ever met Richard's colleagues? From his firm?" A pause. "A few times at those holiday parties you dragged me to." "Why?" "Do you remember anyone named Vanessa Collins?" Another pause, longer this time. "The marketing director?" "Yes, I met her at last year's Christmas party. She seemed nice, very polished. Why are you asking?" "How did Richard introduce her?" "Marianne, what's going on?" "Just answer the question, please." Sarah's voice grew cautious. He introduced her as his colleague. They seemed close, but I figured they worked together." "Marianne, what happened?" I told her everything. The visit to the office, Jessica's revelation, the way my entire marriage had just been exposed as a fraud. Sarah listened without interrupting, and when I finished, the silence on the other end was deafening. "Oh my God," she finally whispered. "Marianne, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. None of us did." Who else was at that party? Tom and Jennifer, the Mortons, maybe 5 or 6 other couples, but Marianne, nobody knew. If we had suspected anything, we would have told you. After hanging up, I sat in the parking lot of a coffee shop, staring at nothing. Richard had been living a double life so complete, so seamlessly integrated, that even our closest friends had been fooled. Or maybe I was the one being fooled while everyone else lived in the real world. My consulting work had taught me to follow the money. Financial records don't lie, even when people do. I pulled out my laptop and logged into our joint accounts, something I hadn't scrutinized in months because I trusted Richard to manage our finances since he made twice what I did. What I found made my hands shake. Monthly transfers to LH Properties for $1,800. Going back 3 years. Regular charges at restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel rooms booked on nights when Richard claimed he was working late at the office. Credit card purchases at jewelry stores, florists, boutiques I didn't recognize. And then I found something that made my chest tighten with rage. A property tax bill forwarded to our home address, quickly buried in Richard's home office files. For an apartment at Lakeshore Heights, one of the most expensive residential complexes in the city. An apartment I knew nothing about, but what I found there would change everything. Lakeshore Heights rose against the afternoon sky like a monument to wealth and privilege, the kind of building where successful professionals kept discreet second residences, or where husbands kept secret lives with women who weren't their wives. I sat in my car in the visitor parking area for 20 minutes, staring at the property tax bill and wondering if I really wanted to know what was behind that apartment door. But I'd come too far to turn back now. The building's security was surprisingly easy to bypass. A delivery person held the door for me, assuming I was a resident. I took the elevator to the 14th floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. Apartment 1407, the number on the tax bill. I stood outside that door for a full minute before I knocked, half hoping no one would answer. But the door opened, and I found myself face to face with a woman I'd only seen in passing at Richard's firm functions. Vanessa Collins was beautiful in that effortless way some women achieve. Mid-40s, perfectly styled auburn hair, wearing casual clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her expression shifted from pleasant expectation to shock in the space of a heartbeat. "You're Marianne," she said. Not a question, a statement. "And you're the woman my husband introduces as his wife." We stood there in the doorway, two women connected by one man's lies, studying each other like adversaries before a battle. "You should come in," Vanessa said finally, stepping back. The apartment was exactly what I'd feared. Not a hiding place or a secret meeting spot, but a home. A fully furnished, lived-in home with photos on the mantel, books on the shelves, and Richard's favorite reading glasses on the coffee table. But it was the photos that destroyed me completely. Richard and Vanessa at what looked like a company retreat, his arm around her waist in a way that spoke of intimacy and ownership. The two of them on a beach I didn't recognize, both tanned and relaxed. Vanessa wearing a sundress I'd never seen. Richard kissing her cheek while she laughed, her left hand visible and wearing a ring I'd never seen before. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vanessa moved to the window, her back to me. 3 years, since I joined the firm. "And he told you about me?" "He told me you were separated, that you were just waiting for your daughter to finish college before filing for divorce." She turned to face me, and I saw something in her eyes that might have been genuine regret. "He said you'd grown apart years ago, that the marriage was just a formality at that point." The lies were so elaborate, so carefully constructed, that I almost admired the craftsmanship. Richard hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd created parallel universes, telling each woman a different story, keeping both of us trapped in separate versions of a relationship that apparently belonged to neither of us. "Our daughter is married and living in Boston," I said quietly. "She's been gone for 3 years, and Richard and I were never separated. Not legally, not emotionally, not in any way. At least I wasn't." Vanessa's composure cracked. She sank onto the couch, her perfectly manicured hands covering her face. "Oh God, he lied to me too." About everything, apparently. I moved through the apartment like a woman in a dream, cataloging evidence of a life I'd never known existed. Richard's clothes in the closet, his favorite scotch in the cabinet, his dental appointments and gym membership records scattered on a desk. And then I found the folder that changed everything. Tucked in a drawer in the home office, labeled simply Dissolution Strategy in Richard's precise handwriting. Inside were documents that made my hands shake. Draft divorce petitions, financial analyses, character assessments, and notes, pages and pages of notes, documenting alleged instances of my emotional instability, my inability to adapt to his professional growth, my resistance to change. According to these documents, Richard had been building a case against me for over 2 years, creating a narrative where I was the problem, the obstacle, the reason our marriage had failed. Every quiet evening I'd spent at home while he claimed to be working late. Every time I'd expressed contentment with our life instead of demanding more luxury. Every instance of my being supportive rather than ambitious had been transformed into evidence of my inadequacy. "He was going to divorce you," Vanessa said from behind me. She'd followed me into the office, reading over my shoulder. "He told me it would be next month, before the new year. So you two could be together officially. He said once the divorce was final, we could stop hiding." I turned to face her. "Did you love him?" She looked away. "I thought I did. Or maybe I just loved the version of himself he showed me. The successful attorney, the ambitious partner, the man who made me feel like I was part of something important." She laughed bitterly. "I never questioned why we couldn't be seen together at firm events, why we had to be so careful about public appearances. He said it was professional ethics until the divorce was finalized. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him, just like you wanted to believe your marriage was real." We stood there in that apartment, 2 women who'd both been betrayed by the same man, realizing that neither of us had ever really known him at all. But what I did next, nobody expected. I spent the next 3 days doing what I do best, following the money. My background in financial consulting had taught me that people could lie with their words, but numbers told the truth. And Richard's numbers were telling a story that went far beyond simple adultery. I started with the property tax bill for the Lakeshore Heights apartment. Richard had listed himself as sole owner, using marital assets to purchase and maintain a property I'd known nothing about. That was fraud. Clear, documentable fraud. Then I traced the monthly transfers to what I now knew was the apartment's maintenance fees. $1,800 every month for 3 years. $64,800 of marital assets used to maintain his secret life. But that was just the beginning. I hired a forensic accountant, a woman I'd worked with on client cases, and gave her access to everything I'd discovered. Within 48 hours, she called me with findings that made my blood run cold. "Marianne, this is bigger than you thought. Your husband has been systematically diverting client trust funds." "What?" "Small amounts, never enough to trigger automatic audits. But over 3 years, he's moved approximately $230,000 through shell companies that trace back to business ventures linked to Vanessa Collins. Marketing firms, consulting services, all of it fraudulent." I sat down heavily, the implications crashing over me. Richard wasn't just an unfaithful husband. He was a criminal. And he'd been using our marriage, our shared assets, and his clients' money to fund his fantasy life with another woman. "There's more," Jennifer continued. "The divorce strategy documents you found? They're not just personal notes. He's been setting you up to look incompetent so he can claim full control of marital assets in the divorce. If he'd succeeded, you would have walked away with almost nothing while he and Vanessa started fresh with money he essentially stole." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Richard hadn't just stopped loving me. He'd actively plotted my destruction, carefully dismantling my reputation and financial security while I remained completely oblivious. That afternoon, I did 3 things that would change everything. First, I called Richard's managing partners at the firm. Not Richard himself, but the 3 senior partners who oversaw the firm's operations and ethics compliance. I requested an emergency meeting. Second, I contacted the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee and filed a formal complaint documenting the misappropriation of client funds. Third, I filed for divorce, but not with a quiet dissolution petition. I filed a contested divorce citing adultery, fraud, and misappropriation of marital assets, and I requested a forensic audit of all our financial records. The meeting with the managing partners was scheduled for the next morning. I walked into that conference room with my forensic accountant, my attorney, and a binder 3 inches thick containing every piece of evidence I'd collected. Richard was already there, flanked by Vanessa. They both looked shocked to see me. Richard recovered quickly, his attorney face sliding into place. "Marianne, what's this about? If you wanted to discuss our separation, we could have done this privately." "We're not separated, Richard. We're married. At least until the divorce is finalized, and these gentlemen need to know what you've been doing with client funds." The color drained from his face. Over the next 2 hours, I laid out everything. The apartment purchased with marital assets, the diverted client funds, the fraudulent business arrangements with Vanessa's shell companies, the systematic plan to paint me as mentally unstable to win a favorable divorce settlement. The managing partners listened with expressions that grew progressively more horrified. When I finished, the senior partner, Malcolm Wright, looked at Richard with something close to disgust. "Is any of this untrue?" he asked. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it again. His attorney whispered something in his ear. Finally, he shook his head. "I want his resignation by end of business today," Malcolm said. "And Miss Collins, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you both from the building." Vanessa started crying. Richard just stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not remorse, but something darker. The look of a man who'd been outmaneuvered and knew it. "You've destroyed everything," he said quietly. "No, Richard. You destroyed it. I'm just refusing to help you cover it up anymore." And then something happened that I never expected. The divorce proceedings took 8 months, but they felt like 8 years. Richard fought every step, trying to paint me as vindictive, claiming I'd misunderstood innocent business arrangements, suggesting that I was financially naive and didn't understand the complexities of corporate law. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forensic audit confirmed every allegation. The State Bar suspended his license pending a full investigation. And the more Richard fought, the worse he looked. Vanessa, to her credit, cooperated fully with investigators once she understood the scope of Richard's deceptions. She'd been used just as much as I had, manipulated into participating in schemes she hadn't fully understood. Her testimony was devastating for Richard's case. The night before our final divorce hearing, I sat in my home office, surrounded by documents and memories. 27 years of marriage reduced to exhibits and evidence tags. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollow. My phone rang. Richard's number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Marianne." His voice sounded older, tired. "I know I have no right to call you." "No, you don't. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what I did, for how I did it." I waited, saying nothing. I convinced myself that our marriage was already over, that I was just being honest about what we'd both been feeling. But the truth is, I ended it long before I admitted it to myself. I ended it when I decided you weren't enough anymore, instead of trying to work with you to build something better. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I destroyed everything for something that wasn't even real. Vanessa and I lasted exactly 6 weeks after I left the firm. Turns out our great romance was more about the excitement of secrecy than about actually wanting to build a life together. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you?" He sounded genuinely curious. I considered the question honestly. "Yes, I am. I'm sorry you threw away 27 years for something that didn't exist. I'm sorry you hurt so many people in pursuit of a fantasy. I'm sorry you discovered too late that what we had was actually valuable. Do you ever think about what might have happened if I'd just talked to you? If I'd been honest about feeling restless instead of creating this whole elaborate deception? Sometimes. But Richard, the problem wasn't that you felt restless or wanted more from life. The problem was that you chose deception and betrayal instead of honest communication. You chose to destroy me instead of working with me. Silence stretched between us. I hope you're happy, Marianne. I hope you find someone who appreciates what I was too blind to value. I already have, I said quietly. After he hung up, I sat in the darkness of my office, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. A year ago, I'd been living a lie without knowing it, married to someone who was systematically planning my replacement while accepting my love and support. Now I was alone, but not lonely. Starting over, but not starting from scratch. But what came next wasn't revenge. It was something much more powerful. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday morning in April. The judge awarded me 60% of our marital assets, citing Richard's fraudulent use of community property and his systematic attempt to defraud me during divorce proceedings. Richard was ordered to pay substantial alimony and was facing potential criminal charges for the client fund diversions. I walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter than I had in years. 3 months later, I sold our house. The big colonial where we'd raised our daughter, where I'd hosted dinner parties and anniversary celebrations, where I'd believed I was building a life with someone who loved me. It sold quickly, and I used the proceeds to buy something I'd always dreamed of, but never thought I could have. A small cottage by the ocean, 2 hours north of the city, big windows, a view of the water, space for a garden. Room enough for me and for the life I was finally ready to build. I met Daniel at a charity auction benefiting marine conservation. He was an architect, recently widowed, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that made me feel safe without feeling stifled. He didn't need me to be anything other than what I was. He found my contentment with simple pleasures charming rather than limiting. He valued my strength without being threatened by it. "You've been through something terrible," he said on our third date, as we walked along the beach near my new home. "I have, but I survived it. More than survived. You fought back. You protected yourself. That takes courage." I looked out at the ocean, watching the waves break against the shore in their eternal rhythm. It took me a long time to realize that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. That supporting someone's dreams doesn't require abandoning your own worth. Daniel took my hand. Richard was a fool. Richard was a man who confused ambition with character, who thought that wanting more automatically made him more. But growth isn't about climbing higher. It's about becoming more honest, more compassionate, more true to yourself. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of seagulls overhead and waves against sand creating a natural symphony. "Do you ever miss it?" Daniel asked. "The marriage? The life you thought you had?" "I miss the illusion sometimes, the comfort of believing I knew where I belonged. But I don't miss the reality of slowly disappearing while trying to be enough for someone who'd already decided I wasn't." That evening, as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, I sat on my small porch with a glass of wine and thought about the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd discovered that my marriage was a lie, that the man I'd loved for 27 years had been living a double life, systematically planning my destruction while accepting my love and support. But I'd also discovered something far more important. I'd discovered that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, that I could stand up for myself without becoming cruel, that I could demand justice without seeking revenge, that I could rebuild my life on a foundation of truth instead of comfortable illusions. Richard had tried to paint me as the problem, the obstacle, the reason our marriage failed. But in fighting back, I'd proven something far more powerful, that refusing to accept someone else's false narrative about who you are is the ultimate act of self-love. My phone rang. My daughter, calling from Boston. "Mom, How's the new place? Perfect, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect. I'm so proud of you, you know that? The way you handled everything with Dad. The way you protected yourself. The way you didn't just let him destroy you. Thank you, honey. That means everything to me. And Daniel? Are we going to meet him soon? I smiled, watching the last light fade from the sky. Soon, when you're ready. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the ocean and feeling at peace for the first time in years. Richard had been right about one thing. We both deserved to be with someone who truly understood us. He deserved someone capable of the same level of calculated deception he'd practiced, and I deserved someone whose love didn't come with conditions, expiration dates, and exit strategies. The greatest gift Richard ever gave me wasn't the 27 years we spent together. It was the divorce that finally set me free. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I stood in the garden behind my cottage, planting roses. The morning sun was warm on my shoulders, the sound of waves a constant companion. This was my life now, simple, honest, beautiful in its authenticity. Daniel appeared on the porch, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He'd stayed over the night before, and seeing him there in the morning light felt right in a way that nothing with Richard ever had. "You're up early," he said, settling into one of the Adirondack chairs I'd bought at a local craft fair. "Couldn't sleep. Too excited about the garden." He smiled. "You know what I love about you, Marianne? You find joy in the actual living of life, not in the performance of it, not in what it looks like to other people, just in the real, messy, beautiful experience of being present." I sat down beside him, accepting the coffee gratefully. Richard used to think that made me boring. Richard was an idiot who confused performance with substance. He spent so much energy maintaining an image that he forgot to actually live. I did that too, you know. For years, I performed the role of the good wife, the supportive spouse, the woman who never demanded too much or asked uncomfortable questions. I was so busy being what I thought he needed that I forgot to ask what I needed. "And what do you need?" I looked around at my small cottage, my garden, the ocean stretching endlessly before us. This. Honesty. Peace. Someone who sees me as I actually am and doesn't need me to be anything more or less. That's what you have. We sat in comfortable silence, drinking our coffee as the morning unfolded around us. No performance, no pretense. Just 2 people who'd both survived loss and found each other on the other side. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Lunch this weekend? Dying to hear about the new garden and your handsome architect." I smiled, typing back a quick yes. The funny thing about trauma is that it doesn't disappear just because you survive it. The betrayal Richard inflicted left scars that I'd carry forever. There were still moments when I doubted my judgment, when I questioned whether I'd missed obvious signs because I was naive or willfully blind. But those moments came less frequently now, because I'd learned something essential through that devastating experience. My trust wasn't the problem. Richard's deception was. My contentment wasn't a character flaw. It was a gift he'd been too damaged to appreciate. My loyalty wasn't weakness. It was strength that had been exploited by someone who didn't deserve it. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, studying my face. "How grateful I am that Richard destroyed our marriage." He raised an eyebrow. "That's an interesting perspective. If he'd stayed, if he'd never been caught, I would have spent the rest of my life believing I was enough while slowly disappearing. I would have continued accepting whatever scraps of affection he offered while he built his real life with someone else. I would have died without ever knowing what it felt like to be truly seen and valued. So his betrayal was actually a gift. His betrayal was destruction disguised as liberation. It destroyed the illusion I'd been living in. And sometimes, the most loving thing the universe can do is destroy what's false, so we can finally build something true. Daniel reached for my hand. "I'm glad he was stupid enough to let you go. So am I." That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Vanessa Collins stood at my front door, looking nervous and out of place in her designer clothes against my casual coastal setting. "I hope it's okay that I came," she said. "I got your address from the court records. I wanted to talk to you." I invited her in, curious about what could have brought her here after all this time. We sat in my living room, two women who'd been pitted against each other by a man who'd lied to both of us, trying to find common ground in the aftermath. "I came to apologize," Vanessa said. "Not just for the affair, but for believing his lies about you, for participating in something that hurt you so deeply. You didn't know the truth. I should have questioned more. I should have pushed back when things didn't add up. I wanted to believe I was special, that what we had was different. But the truth is, I was just another person he manipulated." "What are you doing now?" "I moved back to Chicago, started my own marketing firm. Smaller than what I had at the firm, but it's mine. Built on honest work instead of—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "Instead of stolen money and lies." "Yes." She looked at me directly for the first time. "I need you to know something. The money Richard diverted through my companies? I didn't know about it. I thought those were legitimate consulting contracts. When I found out the truth, I worked with prosecutors to return every penny. It's all been paid back to the clients who were defrauded." "I know," my lawyer told me. "I'll spend the rest of my career rebuilding my reputation, but I wanted you to know that I understand what he took from you. Not just money or years, but your ability to trust your own judgment. And I'm sorry I was part of that." I studied her face, seeing genuine remorse there. Richard was very good at making people believe what he wanted them to believe. He was. But that doesn't absolve me of responsibility for my choices. I chose to believe the convenient lie instead of asking uncomfortable questions. I chose to participate in secrecy instead of demanding transparency. Those were my decisions, and I have to live with them. What would you tell someone facing a similar situation? Vanessa considered this carefully. I'd tell them that when someone asks you to keep your relationship secret, they're telling you who they are. I'd tell them that real love doesn't require hiding. And I'd tell them that the most expensive thing you can do is accept a cheap version of love because you're afraid you don't deserve better. After she left, I sat on my porch watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon, thinking about forgiveness and accountability and the strange paths that lead us toward wisdom. Vanessa and I would never be friends. The damage had been too deep, the betrayal too complete. But I could recognize her humanity, her own victimization in Richard's schemes, without having to excuse her choices. That's what I'd learned through this whole devastating experience. That life isn't simple. That people aren't either good or evil, but complex combinations of strength and weakness, wisdom and foolishness, courage and fear. And that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to let someone else's betrayal continue to poison your present. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what country you're watching from. Your participation keeps this community alive, where we share real stories about strength, dignity, and second chances. 2 years after my divorce, I stood as guest speaker at a women's business conference, sharing my story of financial recovery and personal reinvention. The audience was filled with women of all ages, many of them recovering from their own betrayals and losses. The hardest part wasn't discovering my husband's infidelity, I told them. It was realizing how long I'd been complicit in my own diminishment. How many times I'd made myself smaller, quieter, less demanding, because I believed that was what love required. I paused, looking out at the faces before me. But love doesn't require you to disappear. Real love celebrates your presence. Real love doesn't ask you to doubt yourself. It helps you trust yourself more deeply. After the talk, a young woman approached me, tears streaming down her face. How did you find the courage to fight back, to protect yourself? I stopped waiting for permission to value my own worth. I stopped expecting the person who'd betrayed me to suddenly develop integrity, and I started trusting that I deserved better than what I was accepting. But weren't you afraid of being alone? Terrified. But I learned something important. Being alone is completely different from being lonely. I was lonelier in my marriage, living with someone who was mentally and emotionally absent, tentar nova mentis continuar, than I ever was living by myself with honest solitude. The young woman nodded, wiping her tears. Thank you. I needed to hear that. As she walked away, I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been over the past few years. The naive wife who'd trusted blindly, the devastated woman who'd discovered the truth, the fighter who'd refused to be destroyed, and now, this version, the survivor who'd learned to transform pain into wisdom. That evening, Daniel and I hosted a small dinner party at the cottage. Sarah and her husband, a few neighbors I'd grown close to. My daughter and her husband had driven down from Boston. Simple food, good wine, genuine laughter. This was my life now. Not the performance of perfection I'd maintained during my marriage, but the messy, beautiful reality of authentic connection. As I looked around the table at these people who loved me for who I actually was, not who they needed me to be, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Complete. After everyone left, Daniel and I cleaned up together in comfortable silence. He washed while I dried, a simple domestic rhythm that felt more intimate than any grand gesture. You're quiet tonight, he observed. Just thinking about how different my life is from what I thought it would be. Better or worse? Neither. Just truer. He smiled, pulling me close. That's the best kind of different. Later, lying in bed with moonlight streaming through the windows and the sound of waves in the distance, I thought about Richard. I wondered if he ever thought about what he'd lost, if he ever regretted choosing temporary excitement over lasting partnership. But mostly I felt grateful. Grateful that his betrayal had forced me to become someone I never would have discovered otherwise. Someone stronger, wiser, more resilient than the woman who'd walked into that law office 2 years ago expecting to surprise her husband with lunch. That woman had died that day. But someone better had been born from her ashes. 3 years after the divorce, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. Richard's handwriting on the envelope. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity won. The letter was long, written in his precise script, and it was the most honest communication he'd ever given me. Marianne, it began. I'm writing this from court-ordered therapy, where I've been forced to confront the reality of who I became and why. My therapist suggested I write you this letter, not because you need to hear it, but because I need to face what I did. I destroyed our marriage. Not because you weren't enough, but because I was too cowardly to admit that I'd stopped growing emotionally while you continued to evolve. You were always braver than me, brave enough to be content, brave enough to find meaning in simple things, brave enough to be honest about who you were. I was terrified of that honesty, so I built a fantasy life where I could be someone different, someone more impressive, someone whose worth wasn't measured by character, but by achievement and status. Vanessa wasn't the love of my life. She was a mirror that showed me a version of myself I wanted to believe in, a successful, dynamic man who deserved better than his ordinary life. But that man never existed. He was just another lie I told myself. The truth is, I was ordinary. I am ordinary. And instead of accepting that and finding peace in it the way you did, I tried to destroy anyone who reminded me of my own limitations. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just telling you that you were right about everything, about love, about partnership, about what matters. I hope you've built a life that makes you happy. You deserve every good thing this world has to offer. Richard. I read the letter twice, then set it aside. Part of me felt vindicated. He'd admitted everything I'd always known. But mostly, I felt sad for the man who'd wasted so much energy running from himself. What's that? Daniel asked, bringing me coffee on the porch. A confession from someone who finally learned to tell the truth, about 20 years too late. Are you going to respond? I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. No, some chapters need to stay closed. His journey toward self-awareness isn't my responsibility anymore. Daniel kissed the top of my head. Wise woman. Hard-earned wisdom. We sat together watching the morning unfold, and I realized something profound. Richard's letter no longer had the power to hurt me. His words, his regrets, his belated understanding, none of it mattered to the life I'd built without him. That was real freedom. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of peace that exists independent of anyone else's validation or remorse. 5 years after the divorce, I stood on the beach behind my cottage, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. My daughter stood beside me, her hand resting on her swollen belly. My first grandchild would be born in 3 months. Mom, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret how it ended with Dad? I know he hurt you terribly, but do you ever wish you'd tried to work it out? I considered the question carefully, wanting to give her an honest answer. I regret that he chose deception over communication. I regret the years I spent believing a lie. But do I regret that our marriage ended? No, sweetheart, because if it hadn't, I never would have discovered who I could become. You seem so happy now, different from how you were before. I am different. The old version of me believed that love meant endless accommodation, that being a good partner meant making myself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. This version knows that real love expands both people. It doesn't require anyone to diminish themselves. Daniel treats you so differently than Dad did. Daniel sees me. Your father only ever saw a reflection of his own needs and expectations. There's a profound difference between being looked at and being seen. My daughter leaned her head on my shoulder. I'm glad you found someone who sees you. Me too, baby. Me too. That evening, our extended family gathered for dinner. Daniel's grown children, my daughter and son-in-law, Sarah and her family. All of us together, laughing and sharing stories, building new memories on a foundation of honesty and genuine affection. This was my legacy now. Not the ruins of a failed marriage, but the thriving life I'd built from those ruins. Not the betrayal I'd survived, but the wisdom I'd gained from surviving it. As I looked around the table at these people who'd become my chosen family, I felt a gratitude so deep it almost hurt. Richard's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been necessary. It had shattered the comfortable illusion I'd been living in and forced me to build something real. Sometimes destruction is the only path to authentic creation. Sometimes loss is the only way to discover what truly matters. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the doorway to the best version of yourself. 10 years after the divorce, I received news that Richard had died. A heart attack, sudden and unexpected. He was 66 years old. I felt sadness, but not the consuming grief I might have expected. He'd been a significant part of my life once, but that felt like a different lifetime. A different version of me who'd loved a man who never really existed. I attended the funeral, sitting in the back, observing rather than participating. There were colleagues from his firm, a few distant relatives, a woman I didn't recognize who sat in the front row, crying softly. Perhaps another relationship, another secret life. I didn't stay for the reception. But as I walked to my car, I felt a strange sense of closure, not because Richard was gone, but because I realized I'd already said goodbye to him years ago. The man who died had been a stranger to me long before his actual death. That evening, I told Daniel about the funeral. "How do you feel?" he asked. Peaceful, sad for the life he never allowed himself to really live, but mostly grateful for the life I found after he was gone. No regrets. None. The marriage I thought I had never existed. I can't mourn a fantasy, but I can celebrate the reality I built from its ashes. We sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, and I thought about all the different ways a life can unfold. The paths not taken, the choices that define us, the moments that change everything. If someone had told me 10 years ago that Richard's betrayal would ultimately be the greatest gift he ever gave me, I would have thought them cruel. But now I understood the truth of it. His betrayal freed me from a life I was living for someone else. His deception forced me to build something authentic. His abandonment taught me that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. The woman I'd become wouldn't exist without the devastation I'd survived, and I wouldn't trade this version of myself for anything, not even to undo the pain that created her. If this story inspired you, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what country you're watching from. Here, we share stories that touch the soul and remind us that it's never too late to write a new ending. Now, at 64 years old, I spend my days working with women who are going through their own betrayals and losses. I've turned my experience into a consulting practice that helps women protect themselves financially during divorce and rebuild their lives afterward. Every woman who walks into my office carries the same expression I once wore: devastation, confusion, the soul-deep exhaustion that comes from having your reality shattered. And to each of them, I say the same thing. Right now, you think this is the end of your story, but it's actually the beginning of discovering who you are when you're not busy being who someone else needed you to be. Some believe me, some don't. But eventually, they all discover the same truth I did, that the person who betrayed you did you a favor, even if they never meant to. They showed you that you were strong enough to survive the unthinkable. They proved that your worth wasn't dependent on someone else's ability to recognize it. They freed you from a life that looked right but felt wrong. And they gave you permission to finally, truly, completely become yourself. Daniel and I were married 5 years after my divorce from Richard. A small ceremony on the beach, just family and close friends. No elaborate production, no performance. Just two people who'd both survived loss and found each other on the other side, promising to build something real together. We've been married for 5 years now, and every single day feels like a choice we're both making. Not an obligation or a habit, but a conscious decision to continue building this life together. That's what I never had with Richard. The sense that we were both choosing each other every day in full awareness of who we actually were. My cottage by the ocean has become a gathering place for women seeking wisdom, hope, and practical guidance for navigating their own betrayals. Every weekend, someone new arrives, carrying their pain like heavy luggage, wondering if they'll ever feel whole again. And every time, I get to tell them the truth that saved me. You will not just survive this. You will become someone extraordinary because of it. The betrayal you're experiencing isn't the end of your story. It's the plot twist that makes everything that comes after possible. And the person who destroyed your illusions did you the greatest favor of your life, even though it doesn't feel that way now. Last month, I turned 65. Daniel threw me a surprise party, filled with all the people who've become my family over the past decade. Women I've counseled, neighbors who've become friends, my daughter, my son-in-law, and my 2 beautiful grandchildren. As I looked around at these faces, I realized something profound. This life, this community, this version of myself would never have existed if Richard hadn't betrayed me. His cruelty created the space for this kindness. His lies forced me to build a life on truth. His betrayal taught me the difference between being loved and being valued. That night, after everyone left, Daniel and I sat on the porch, watching the moonlight on the water. "Happy birthday, beautiful." "Thank you for this life," I said. "For seeing me, for choosing me every day. Thank you for being brave enough to start over, for not letting what happened to you define what was possible for you." It did define me, though, just not in the way Richard intended. How so? His betrayal taught me that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. That I could stand up for myself without becoming bitter. That I could demand justice without seeking revenge. That I could rebuild my life on a foundation of truth instead of comfortable illusions. So, in a strange way, you're grateful? I thought about that for a long time before answering. I'm grateful for who I became because of what I survived. But I'll never be grateful for the betrayal itself. That distinction matters. Why? Because gratitude for the growth doesn't excuse the cruelty that caused it. I can celebrate my strength without celebrating the person who made that strength necessary. Daniel nodded slowly. That's wisdom. That's survival. We sat in silence for a while, comfortable in each other's presence in a way that still feels like a miracle after all these years. Finally, Daniel spoke again. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if Richard had never betrayed you? Sometimes. I imagine I'd still be living in that big house, making dinner for one, believing I was happy while slowly disappearing. I'd probably still be that woman who made herself smaller so her husband could feel bigger. I'd be comfortable, but not truly alive. So the betrayal was necessary? The betrayal was devastating. But yes, it was also necessary. Some transformations require complete destruction first. You can't build something authentic on a foundation of lies. You have to burn it all down and start over. That takes courage. It takes desperation. Courage comes later, when you're standing in the ashes, trying to decide what to build next. As we prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the mirror. 65 years old, silver hair, lines etched by time and experience, but eyes that sparkled with life and purpose. This was the face of a survivor, a fighter, a woman who'd refused to be destroyed by someone else's cruelty. And I was proud of her. Now, as I write this final chapter, sitting on my porch with the morning sun warming my face and the sound of waves providing a constant, comforting rhythm, I want to share the most important lesson I've learned. The betrayal that destroyed your life wasn't the end. It was a violent, necessary rebirth. The person you were before had to die so the person you're becoming could emerge. And the life you're mourning? It was never as real as you believed. You were living someone else's script, playing a role you thought was your authentic self. To every woman reading this who's just discovered a betrayal, who's standing in the ruins of everything she believed, I want you to know this. You will survive this. Not just survive, you will thrive. The pain you're feeling right now will transform into wisdom. The trust that was violated will teach you how to trust yourself more deeply. The love that was betrayed will show you what real love actually looks like. And the person who destroyed your illusions will become a footnote in the story of your becoming. Years from now, you'll sit in a space you created, surrounded by people who love the real you, and you'll realize that the worst thing that ever happened to you was actually the doorway to your best life. Not because the betrayal was good, but because you were strong enough to transform it into something that served your growth instead of your destruction. That's the real victory. Not surviving, not even thriving, but becoming so completely yourself that you're grateful for everything that forced you to discover who you really are. I am Marianne. I am 65 years old, and I am finally, truly, completely free. Free from the need to be perfect. Free from the fear of not being enough. Free from the exhausting performance of trying to earn love that should have been freely given. My husband betrayed me. He tried to destroy me. He wanted me to disappear quietly so he could build his fantasy life without guilt or consequences. But I refused. I fought back. I protected myself. I rebuilt my life on a foundation of truth instead of comfortable lies. And in doing so, I discovered something extraordinary. The greatest love story of my life wasn't with Richard or even with Daniel, though he's been an incredible partner. The greatest love story was learning to love myself enough to refuse anything less than truth, respect, and authentic connection. That's the real happy ending. Not finding someone else to complete you, but becoming so complete in yourself that you only accept relationships that celebrate who you actually are. To everyone watching this from wherever you are in the world, I want you to know, your betrayal has an expiration date. Your pain will transform. Your tears will dry. And you will emerge from this fire as someone remarkable, someone who knows her worth, someone who demands honesty, someone who builds her life on truth instead of hope and illusion. That person is waiting for you on the other side of this devastation. She's stronger than you can imagine, wiser than you can conceive, more beautiful in her authenticity than you ever were in your performance of perfection. And she's worth every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of pain you're enduring right now. Keep going. Keep fighting. Keep becoming. Your best life is waiting on the other side of this betrayal. I promise.